Jack, Levi.
The book club from hell.
I'm really pleased today to have Ivan Niccolai on the show, also known as Notes from the Periphery on Substack. And that's how I first became aware of you. And I've just read Ivan's new book, Like You Have a Choice. And I really liked it. It's a short story collection. Definitely some of these I did read on Substack. The Gift I'd read on Substack, that was the one I remembered most clearly. I think the opening story as well about Hector's gold pendant. I'd read on Substack. And then there are a bunch of stories here that I hadn't come across. Particularly some of the weirder ones, like The Marionette or Zuckerberg's Udders. I hadn't come across. So had you published those ones on Substack and I just didn't come across them?
The Marionette, no, actually. It did get published in like proper publications, and it even got selected for like best short fictions collection that's coming out next year. But it was too small and weird to go in like a long Substack post. So yeah, just kind of put it in that.
But anyway, I was really like these short stories. I really liked that not only are they about Melbourne, but about particularly the inner north of Melbourne, which is a place I've spent a lot of time. It's people from New York are spoiled for choice when it comes to fiction about their place. So it's always so refreshing to come across something that's written about places that I know very, very intimately. So what would you say Like You Have a Choice is about? Because I feel like there are definite themes of it. There are definite preoccupations of yours that you keep coming over to.
Yeah, the easy one is, of course, skewering immediately what is so ridiculous about the inner north, the luxury beliefs, that kind of kitsch progressivism, and then there's a question, I guess, of identity, of being an immigrant, of having traveled a lot growing up. And then perhaps there's kind of that show don't tell about like, how can you write about things in a non-moralizing way once more? How can you sort of make literature fun? And then I'm an Italian culturally, and the thing everyone loves about Italy is the sexy comedies. It's a genre that's been going on since the Decameron. It's really funny when we're really horny people and we try to get off and hilarity ensues. And Italians find that genre infinitely hilarious. And I thought, why not bring that to a contemporary setting? And then a real inspiration was Heavy Traffic, the magazine. Really well done. Again, very New York centric. The style of the prose is amazing. And it's also quite funny stories, not preoccupied with like identitarian concerns. There's no, I am this subaltern and this is my experience. It's just like, what if we think about the funny or surrealist elements to the world? So yeah, those are kind of the influences. The third one was also being inspired by Substack. And a lot of the main writers like Sam Criss and the name escapes me, but the one that Sam Criss really likes.
He likes other people writing?
Yeah, it's a rare one. He's the philosopher. Ruju Smith. One of the main Substackers.
Mm-hmm. I will have to look at that person if it seems like a miracle that Sam Criss has anything nice to say about anyone.
Sam Criss says that absolutely. He says he signed up to Substack because of Justin Smith. Yeah, he signed up for this guy's writing, and what both of them have been doing. And I've also a little bit parted ways with being a fan of Sam Criss. I like him, but I like him best now when he's doing his travel writing, and what I really love is the genre bending nature of it. Like, why should you need to write a short story or a poem or an essay? Why not throw a bit of mixture of all those three and leave the reader guessing what's actually going on? So a lot of some of the weirder styles in there have been fully influenced by just Substack. You can do what you want. and people
Mhm.
will still find it enjoyable, even if they're like, I don't know, is this an opinion piece? Is it fiction? Is it true? Yeah, is it a journalistic flavor of article? Yeah,
Yeah, there's the Sam Chris special of there's a point in almost everything he writes where he starts making things up, but maintains the exact same register as when he's he's relaying things that are actually biographically true. Um, and I always really enjoyed that there's this grey zone. There's always a part where you know, okay, yeah, he is just inventing things here. And there's a part where you're like, I'm 90% sure he's telling the truth. And then there's the grey zone between them where you actually just don't know if it's true or not. And that's where I think his writing's at its most fun.
totally. When he's being this bitchy progressive, I find him his least interesting. I almost would like to have a fund where we just randomly, I don't know, we do an extraordinary rendition of Sam Chris and we throw him into some weird part of the world and we make him do travel writing stuff, because if he stays too long in London, he inevitably gets a bit crabby.
The Labour Party will take him back. Yeah, so it's one thing that struck me about this story collection is your treatment of the wog in Melbourne. This is something that I'm pretty sure we've talked about a bunch of times on this show, but non-Australians will probably just be completely lost. So what is a wog? Because you bring them up a few times, and it can be an insult, it can be a term of endearment. It's a it's a complex term and a complex phenomenon.
Yeah. Look, if you look at the Wikipedia, it was Western Oriental gentleman, and it was an insult term of the English to basically anyone who was European but not from England, and it was a step up from any of the brown people of the place that the English colonial empire ran. So basically, French, Italians, Balkan people, and I recently rewatched Death in Brunswick, which also really has that theme of like there's the Anglo part of Melbourne with a certain set of values and mores, and then of course there's this Greek element, or this completely not come from that anglophone strand that has and it tends to get lumped everywhere in Melbourne. Like it's typically Arab, from Arab speaking countries, it's Greeks, it's Italians, it's people from the Balkans, and they're just kind of considered by the English to be everyone else. Right. And I think, again, I'm no expert on Melbourne history, but the north side in Melbourne is where a lot of them settled. Um, so there is a lot of this joke and this distinction about love not crossing the Yarra, or kind of the Yarra as the river being this demarcation point between the Wog lands versus a bit more older established money, which you would associate in other Anglo countries with maybe wasps. But again, Australia, there isn't clear distinctions because, as you know, the Catholics here had enormous inroads too. There's a huge Catholic contingent. Anglo, as in the Anglican Church, is a lot smaller here. So it's really hard to make demographic at a sort of sociological level of accuracy here, around what's a wog versus what's an English person or a non-wog.
Mhm.
Yeah.
There are characteristics though. Like, there's a very distinctive accent, and that they're just like a collection of behaviours. Maybe it is just particularly Southern Europe, of like north of the Yarra, everyone on Sundays watering their driveways and
Yes.
examining their lemon and orange trees in the backyard, fixing up their illegal satellite dish. Um,
I'm laughing because I bought a house in Thornbury. It was always held by a Sicilian nonna, never sold,
mhm.
bought in the 60s. It's red brick. It's entirely concreted. There is uh, a clementine tree in the back and a lemon tree out front, and there is an ancient satellite dish bolted up.
There's some platonic form being approached that Sure, but people can come from different, like their ancestors can come from different places. Like you can have people whose grandparents are from Lebanon, people whose grandparents are from southern France, or from Algeria, or from Serbia. But if they spend long enough in Melbourne, they do start to converge upon this platonic form of the wog. There's maybe it's a like a Landian attractor. There's something being born from the future.
Totally. Totally. Totally.
Yeah, but it's funny that it's good that you brought up identity as being a theme of this story collection, because that was one of the things I've thought of as tying all this together. Because you've got identity in a bunch of different ways. Like you've got the international ethnicity of the corporate worker, which does come up a few times. This international homogeneity forming its own distinct culture. Like there's things sitting on top of pre-existing old cultures. You've got the gift, which is one of my favourite stories in the collection. It's about how Melbourne's inner north suburbs are replaced with 8 gigantic skyscrapers. And the residents to be put into these skyscrapers, their identity it's shifted through this process of dissolving their previous boundaries and inhibitions through drugs, sex, making them live in tent cities. You got constructions of identity, like with the marionette, it's one of the strangest stories. You have a handful of shorter pieces that are bordering on theory fiction, in that when I was reading through them, I thought, has this guy been reading Deleuze or Bataille or something like that? And then you directly reference Bataille at one point. But yeah, the marionette is fascinating about this almost eidetic memory for where this person's picked up gestures, turns of phrase, their attempts to become a real person consistently undermined by a nomadic cat. You've got the abomination, this terror and inhumanity of contextlessness, and then you've got talking about the social geography of Melbourne. Has this been a preoccupation of yours your whole life? Just the various facets of identity, and not in a sort of a trite Melbourne University first year arts undergraduate way, but like a more interesting way of examining identity.
Yeah, I could also think, because it's very much been lived. Like Zuckerberg utters a lot of it. There's real elements. Like my mum dragged me through 21 countries before I was sort of 21, and so she was having her adventures around the world. So I never grew up really with a fixed sense of identity or place. And I read novels, and often the great novels, like I'm just reading Philip Roth's The American Pastoral. He's Jewish, American Jewish, and he really has this sense of history of who he is, who he comes from, where his current place in the world is based on this shared sense of identity. And that's also why the book is fragmentary, because I feel like my life and my identity is very fragmentary. There's a lot of like amnesia. There's a lot of things that doesn't fit. There's a lot of cultures that I don't really belong to, but I have them in me. So in a way, the book had to be fragmentary, because I wanted to write about it, but how can I write consistently about a very peripatetic upbringing that in a way was quite destructive and confusing? And I hate sort of direct trauma accounts. And I don't even want to think of myself as a subaltern, as this poor me victimhood person, because it's been amazing. I've got superpowers and stuff. I'm an interesting person from where I've been and where I've been around to. But I wanted to describe it in a way, both the joy of it and the struggles of it, in a very real way, of how it's very hard, the way I see identity, because for me it shifts so much. And that's what the philosophers talk a lot more about. Identity is identity is an illusion, it's a mirage. But for them, it perhaps is a lot more academic. And for me, it's like this is very much how I feel identity to be. So yeah, that's one of the strands I was sort of taking, and also how can you write about something like that without, yeah, in a way that's meant to be joyous and funny, because there's so many accounts out there which are just kind of victim milking, I call it, or
Hmm.
trauma porn or whatever. Um, yeah, I could write a sad recounting blow for blow of how my mom was a weird person and didn't, wasn't as nurturing as a good mother should be, but whatever, that's boring,
Yeah, well, one, it's boring, and two, I feel like almost because that is just its own genre now. Like it's that kind of
Yes,
stuff is
yes,
almost genre fiction or genre autobiography. It's so easy to fall into well-worn grooves that other people have written that I guess just coming back to identity, you lose the identity of what you're trying to convey, and you just start. It almost feels like classical theatre, where people you'd be less an actor under your own name, and you were more a role. Like you are subsumed by this role. That's what a lot of the more popular forms of genre, sort of trauma narcissism, feel like. But
agree.
it becomes very impersonal. It feels like you're listening to the chorus or you're reading the chorus rather than an individual person.
I totally agree. And I think the trauma narrative is so popular now with, there's so much therapy speak everywhere, but I don't think it's particularly helpful. I think what's more interesting is maybe stories of resilience, or stories, okay, what did you do with the cards you were dealt in an interesting way, right? That's the interesting side of the story rather than the recounting blow for blow of every little bit of abuse or neglect or violence. That isn't really edifying in a way.
Mm.
And that's something you should do as in the privacy of the therapeutic relationship. There's a reason why that is a private contract between the therapist and the person. And I think that's just, again, just supposed to get you on your way. And then people now want to take it out of that privacy and air the dirty laundry. Yeah, what benefit does that do to anyone, really?
I think there is probably a social benefit to the person doing it, or they think there is, because at least among some, and it seems to be more a sort of a progressive phenomenon. There's a belief that suffering or trauma morally improves a person, and I'm not convinced it does. Like, I feel bad for someone, but I don't think they're actually a morally superior subject for having suffered.
And isn't that such a religious perspective too? Like it's very, very Protestant, in a way, like or Catholic. It's sanctification via some kind of stigmata that you've been given. It seems like such a mode of religious thinking. And
Hmm.
who's that Tassie stand-up comedian who revolutionized the stand-up world by not having a funny stand-up? That was all a trauma narrative.
I'm not aware of this person. Is that? I mean, I guess it's revolutionary in the sense that if you perform the opposite function to your stated function, I'm an unfunny comedian. That's, I suppose, it's a revolution in that it completely undermines the point of what you're doing.
Well, it's actually even a Sam Crisp quote. He goes, Australians, he says, like Nigerians and Jewish people, a whole list of funny cultures, and then Australians aren't funny. They only they only once revolutionized comedy by not being funny. Um, it was this one stand-up comedy where the whole point was you were supposed to feel called out as a participant in the show, as a spectator, because you weren't progressive enough. And I don't know, you
That
were supposed to come out of that feeling called out because this person was saying how hard their life was to be a lesbian in Tasmania. Um, Everyone was like,
that
okay,
sounds
wow.
aggressively mid 2010s.
It was late 2010s. It was like beginning of
Okay.
COVID. Yeah.
The when I hear about that kind of thing, and that actually does make me kind of want to see if I can find a recording of this show, because it that to me just sounds like displaced Christian guilt. Like they've been enculturated to experience Christian guilt, but don't have the religious framework to express it. and so it just bursts out in strange ways from their unconscious.
Okay, so I googled the name finally. It's Hannah Gadsby.
Okay.
Remember that stand up?
No, I think I managed to avoid that.
Good. No, you didn't miss anything. But for a while there, every stand up had to do with someone standing up. Suddenly,
Oh,
it
this
isn't funny
person.
anymore.
I recognize the face.
Recounting their trauma, and then it's serious, and everyone in the audience is supposed to like pat them on the back. How brave, or how did we let this happen in society? You know.
It feels like it's a combination of confession in which one doesn't have to confess, like one almost like an indulgence, like you pay your ticket, and
Yeah.
in doing so, you've I don't know, your sins are washed away, I suppose. Combination of that and a Maoist struggle session, also one in which you don't have to compete. It's okay. No, how about this? Like the interpassivity of confession or of a struggle session, in that someone else participates for you, and through that interpassive relationship, there are, I guess, their burning religiosity that has no outlet can be soothed for a moment. No, to me, it feels deeply, deeply Christian.
Yeah. Deeply Christian. And this is why we're on the Nick Land track. Like, this is what was so interesting about Nick Land, is he was like, all of your supposed progressivism is really, it's a secular religiosity. You're still believing in the book of Revelations. You still believe in a kind of universal morality. And you still believe that there will be judgment at the end of the world of the morally good versus the morally corrupt. And he's always been, we need to strip that back. So regardless of what people's thoughts are on him, that was always, I feel, his early work, his early to mid work was about, we need to become systematically less religious, because all of our little homilies, our little creature comforts, our luxury beliefs of the inner city, it's religion by a different name. Yeah. I think
where I find it difficult with Land's early work, which I'd say I very much enjoy aesthetically, because I've read The Thirst for Annihilation a few times, and really, like, it's a blast of a book. Like, I'd recommend people read it, although the physical edition is outrageously expensive, even though it's just a print on demand. I don't know why it's priced the way it is. Anyway, I guess my problem is always just concretely, what does it look like to dedicate yourself to 0 as opposed to 1? Just this absolute dissolution of any sort of category of describing this incoherent base matter in terms of anything, to ascribe to it anythingness, to say that the noumenon is merely just this unconscious phenomenon. Just everything we impose upon the world is an imposition of us, and we have to try to escape that. Like, I actually just don't know concretely what does a human life look like in that context.
And I
suppose I'm not even convinced we can leave behind the symbolic as humans.
I agree, and I think he lived it and sort of took far too much speed and
spoken meth.
Meth. He tried it and realized it's an unsustainable mode. And then, if in philosophy, there's now this whole movement, a certain type of theory writing about like the post-human, which again, I find I'm not kind of interested in it, because how can you truly escape the human? Like, you just can't. And I think, again, it's almost this genreified lit scene that is so over all of the different iterations of trauma and identities. And now they're trying to have non-human identitarian concerns, because they're still stuck in that identitarian mode of thinking. Now no one wants to hear a story about, a gay Asian trans immigrant struggles with identity. Now it's like, no, the post-human, I want to write about birds, the perspective of a bird,
or the
perspective of a machine. And I still think it's just impossible, and it's gimmicky from like a writer perspective. Yeah.
Yeah, it's also interesting too with that sort of land's meth period or the smoke and shard period is how he's kind of disavowed it. He said it
Yes.
belongs to the amphetamine god, which is a bit of a
Yeah.
shame because I think that was when he was his most interesting.
And I'll counter that. We've sort of discussed
Mm,
it briefly over chat, and I think he got interesting from like a political economy perspective. There's calendric dominion and templexity, where he's going real political economist. He's going real like we need to unleash the capitalism, and like
mm,
Keynes is a way of holding back the inevitable, just infinitely building debt. Um, it's very cohesive in a way. And that was also when he did his Bitcoin seminar at the New School, where he was just firing on all cylinders. He'd take this topic of the contemporary world and apply his full powers of philosophy onto it. And you were taken on this whirlwind ride, which was very cohesive. And then I feel like Late Land is kind of the neo-reactionary land, where
mm,
he's all into sort of scientific racism and the like, which I'm not that interested. I'm not an Anglo person. I'm not worried about like returning to some kind of Anglo purity position. Like if you follow him now on Twitter, um, he's kind of on that pathway. But yeah, that's how I see like where Land is interesting. And Mark Fisher said about Land, he's the intelligent antagonist. He's the intelligent nemesis that you need to have if you want to truly have a good philosophical position, rather than just people who will parrot the right things to say. So that's why I deeply, deeply respect him, and will happily say I deeply respect him without agreeing with him all the way.
mm.
Yeah.
It's almost, I mean, it's sort of symptomatic that you even feel the need to say, I do not disagree, I don't agree with 100% of the things a person has said while also finding him interesting or respecting his work.
I think
What?
the right is inherently more interesting. The left is it's so conformist that anything on the left is something to do with counterculture, is something to do with peaceniks, it's something to do with
Mm,
sustainability. Whereas if you look at Malaparte, if you look at Julius Evola, if you look at any of the weirdos who like Nick Land who took a right path, I feel like they were, or Fiume, and you look at Marinetti, like the futurist, it's so much more interesting, the sort of path they were trotting down, than, oh, and then we said the right things at the right time and we had a brilliant academic career or something, or we went to the protest march and we took
mm.
LSD. I don't
What
know.
do you think it is that has led to? Because I feel something similar. I find more right leaning theorists more interesting just because they tend to be a bit more heterogeneous. What do you think it is? Do you think it's say post 60s there's a real homogenization of left thought, or at least mainstream left thought, and I suppose as universities have crept further and further to the left, that has had the effect of domesticating a lot of left thought because you go there if you're politically left wing and interested in philosophy, say, or the arts, and then in being there, you're domesticated, which is kind of one of the functions of a university to make sure the intellectual life of a culture is, I guess, it's not unruly to domesticate it and make sure it's not too dangerous. So I suppose there's that domestication function, which can just make things less interesting. Maybe to even pre 60s, or maybe not like before the post Second World War period that we're currently in, and which seems to be slowly unraveling now. There might have also been just the unifying factor of Marx, in that almost everyone on the left was responding in some way to Marx, which might have a homogenizing effect. That said, on the right, a lot of them were doing that to Christianity. I mean, there was that ballast. I'm thinking out loud now. What do you think it is that has made, particularly from the 20th century, like let's just say 1900 onwards, has made left thought feel a bit more homogenous than right thought?
I think 100% it's Marx. And everyone who's who's done some looking up on Marx. Marx even admitted a lot of stuff he was just making up. But
But
anywhere
it's
in the
also when you
universe,
talk about Marx, you say like, well, which Marx? Because it's not like he had the same beliefs through
I
his
think
whole career either.
he didn't at all. And there's some wonderful elements to Marx, and yet he's seized upon. And if you're going to go and do a research degree in any of the liberal arts colleges, you kind of need to have anything in contrast to Marx. He's like the Holy Scripture, and equally to the Bible. The Bible, what is the Bible? What are the like official chapters of the Bible? What's the Apocrypha? What's the correct translation of the Bible? And yet the Bible remains the foundational text for the Christian. And again, what flavor of Christianity? And Marx does the same thing for the progressive. It doesn't matter. You then have to, it becomes a whole debate of picking which Marx, picking which interpretation. Is it a political economy Marx? Is it a philosophy Marx? Is it a futurist Marx? But it's always in relation to Marx. And then Marx's theory of history, I think, is the most toxic brain virus that's ever existed, because that's always what it comes down to. Is any discussion about what's happening in the world needs to come down to capital, the declining rate of profit, and historical materialism.
Yeah, trying to situate it within this. It's almost like a secular eschatology. Like
Yes.
that.
Yes.
Yeah, where are we with respect to the end of days?
Yeah. Yeah, and there's very few. There's the great. I love, from a political economy perspective, the heterodox economists that were non-Marxian. So Veblen, Galbraith, they're now lumped under the institutionals. Niccolai and Bitzon of Capital as Power. And the key thing for Niccolai and Bitzon is differential competition amongst capitalist factions. So it's not just a big capitalist class. There are factions, there are power struggles, and that's a lot. And if you think about the market and market dynamics, it's always for a trader about beating the market. And that's what every single actual person operating within capitalism is thinking of, is beating the market. And then Veblen spoke about business sabotage, how if you look at acquisitions, it's a form of business sabotage. It's not the optimal way that you compete over pricing and quality for a product. It's actually a way of neutralizing the competition. Veblen had this great concept of like the engineer versus business. The engineer would just like to build better products and share their knowledge, and it would not at all be profitable. So the business component comes in and sabotages that efficacy to, of course, impact distribution, to it, in short, artificial scarcity. So there's much more interesting ways of looking at how the world currently is functioning. And Veblen had the whole concept of conspicuous consumption, and which from now we keep talking about luxury beliefs, which are a new form of, rather than luxury consumption or luxury goods, it's a form of luxury beliefs of, we should come back to Melbourne and inner city Melbourne, all these luxury beliefs that these ridiculous progressives have, right? So those are so interesting ways of looking in an open way towards the future, rather than, oh, it's capitalism and one day the apocalypse is going to come. When? Yeah.
When, but it's also, it just feels like a much less interesting way to examine a fascinating phenomenon, which is capitalism, and probably just like the most significant phenomenon that, in a day-to-day sense, at least, any of us are going to have to contend with. It's is terrifying, fascinating, and potentially, like, it can be good to you especially if you appreciate the power of compound interest. Beast that feels like the most fascinating area of study, and not an area of study that should be done glibly or just to say, well, it's a dying phenomenon. We just have to speed up its demise, and that's it. It's it also, because I'm just not. Maybe I'm too much labouring under the burden of capitalist realism, but I just don't know if you can kill it so easily as a revolution. Because it almost, the most remarkable thing about capitalism, its ability to consume, digest, and then sell any opposition to it. Like no matter what your opposition to it or what you think about it, it's going to take that in, make some sort of product out of it, and sell it back to you. And I appreciate this reification at its greatest. I'm saying it as a single entity rather than a group of people operating together. But that's the aspect of it that is most fascinating to me. And
And sorry, keep going.
oh no, go on.
Oh, I just keep thinking of Braudel and his concept of markets versus anti-markets. So, and also Graeber's Debt, the First 5,000 Years. And if we look at Collapse Volume 9, is it? And that work on the arca derivative, where they very much invert the sequence. Like, we believe that sort of initially we were just bartering, and then finance came around, and then debt came around, and then capitalism came, and now we're under this aegis, right? And then there was previously a feudal period, and now we're under this capitalist place. What instead Graeber is looking at from a historical and anthropological perspective is, what if finance was the beginning? What if the first derivative written was like Joseph, who was given an option to get his wife if he labored 7 years in the field? He was given the right but not the obligation to get married, which was the first option. What if farmers were actually writing
Just
futures
never even thought of it in that
contracts
way. Yeah.
to actually, like, I'm gonna get this grain, it's gonna be harvested in the fall. Can I have some finance against that? Because you can't build anything nowadays. You couldn't build the pyramids 2,000 years ago without in some way taking a loan against the future. And when I start thinking about it that way, then when you're looking more today, rather than thinking of capitalism, you're thinking about where do markets apply and where are there anti-markets, and where are there, in my view, systems of patronage designed to insulate powerful interests from the vagaries of the market. And the farmer's market is the classical market system, right? Where there's lots of tomatoes because they're in season, the price of them goes down. And everyone who goes to the market is a price taker. This is Braudel's view. So that if you were a small farmer, you operate within the realms and vagaries of the market. And so futures and options contracts are ways to protect people, because they didn't know how the season would be, whether there would not be pestilence. So they began trading these options. Again, it was taking out a bet on the future. And more, however, you'd see like established aristocracy. It was all about generational wealth. It was all about, in some way, having systems where you had so much wealth that you could become a price setter, or a monopoly. You could become a price setter in the market. So I think of it more in those terms. They're these kind of like differentials of power, rather than like capital is a thing. It's like, let's tell it it's sort of this big evil monster under the bed that infects us all with greed. It's more differential relationships of power in the world today. So that's more how I think about, rather than like reification and capital, because I just don't see necessarily an alternative. But I don't mean that in a bad way. I simply mean it in laws of supply and demand work even in natural systems in a way, right? There's too many zebras and not enough natural predators of the zebras. It's not really like a belief system. It's just an observation about how systems work in the world. So yeah, that's we've gone down a political economy path, but it's always interesting, because even then, if we're looking now, say, anti-Semitism, a lot of that came down to like this hatred specifically of finance. Remember how like it was the Jewish people who were moneylenders, evil moneylenders, and Jesus cast them out. So once again, there's this religious belief that there is like a certain evil in the world today, and that's identified by specifically finance capital. So if we were to sort of extirpate this evil, then we'd have a wholesome system. But if we don't extirpate it, we're going to have the worker apocalypse, which Marx predicts. And that's very interesting, how so much anti-Semitism is like a belief in the evilness of finance and debt. Whereas Graeber turns it on his head and says debt exists everywhere. Imagine if you went to your father or mother and said, here's $200,000. I've paid my debt for you parenting me. Now go and fuck off, right? Your parents would be immensely hurt. And yes, you owe a debt to your family and you owe a debt to everything that's taken care of you through life. And that's kind of the glue that holds society together.
Mm. But is it almost describing debt as obligation in some
Yes,
way? Is a way
as
to,
obligation.
yeah. With these ideas, like, how directly are these ideas influencing your stories? Because some of your stories are pretty character driven. Like I've already mentioned Hector looking for a pendant. But there are other stories of yours which do seem much more directly philosophical. It's like the plastic bag, or Zuckerberg's others also has a lot. The marionette. Are these stories growing from these sort of considerations? Not necessarily of political economy, but other theoretical considerations, or are or is it not necessarily that directly linked?
Yeah, a lot of my thinking is actually a sort of rabid and to describe a Landian reptilian feral optimism towards the future and an openness towards it. Like, what
Mm,
if life is hard, horrible shit happens, but what if it's not all going to collapse? That's a lot of my thinking. What if life goes on? Like, what if climate change isn't going to destroy everything? That's a lot of my thinking is what if we avoided this stupid Christian religious progressive catastrophism towards the future, which almost is like a recital of the rosary, open the Guardian, oh, catastrophe, remember to say a prayer for the end of the human race. That's a lot that informs my thinking of stories. And also when you look at things not from that simplistic Marxian lens, there's so many more ways to look at the future. So what if we had characters that didn't correspond to like, you know, evil, easy moral categories of good and evil, especially the gift. What if
mm,
I deliberately didn't want anyone there to be an easy villain or victim or good person. It was deliberately supposed to make people struggle and have to think about and perhaps throw away those notions of good and evil, those easy moral categories. That's a lot that informs what I'm writing about. Yeah.
mm, mm. And there is something. It's not anything impressive on my part to say that it feels very Ballardian, because you do just quote J.G. Ballard at the beginning of that story. You quote High Rise about something like how revolting good taste can
And look,
can
I,
be.
I almost that could almost be from my view. I reread High Rise before I wrote it. I was very much thinking maybe if you wrote a sequel to High Rise, like, the architect gets a second go at
Mm,
making his ideal architecture society. And it's true, there is to the inner north, to bring it back locally to the inner north, there is this aristocracy of good taste, whether it's
mm,
ethical consumption, whether it's good cutesy pie sustainable design. Every little corner of everywhere is highly aestheticized.
mm,
And I keep seeing crazy people around Melbourne. So the more we have a progressive paradise, and again, I'm making stuff up here. I'm here fully in creative writing mode. I'm just thinking, what if the more you try to make a good progressive society where everyone's needs are met and there's support for every kind of disability and there's good people who think the right things and don't jump to conclusions? What if the more you try and have that society, the more there's just this undigestible, you know, real that intrudes, and it's the
mm.
crazy people of Melbourne who get higher and higher on meth, madder and madder, and there's no way to fully absorb this excess into society. It's Bataille, right? It's that
Yeah,
accursed
yeah, yeah. I was going to say that
yeah.
exactly. Bataille and psychoanalysis, because I do like there's just this underbelly, this id underbelly of the unconscious, and
Yes.
I mean, no matter how powerful the superego gets, because the ideal progressive paradise for me just feels like a rigid superego, like a society of the superego more than anything else. The
Totally.
the id is going to smash through the middle of it in places. So, or the real, if you want to put a Lacanian spin on it, like that. it's gonna put like just the human animal in all its unreason is going to burst through that. No matter how perfectly thought through a society you have.
And that's I have a phrase desire overrides meaning as well, right? Like there's
Mm,
I just wish there's more of that id to a degree. It's always present. And the more like I pick up any book and a progressive writer needs to write an apology for how they're on stolen land, which again I'm fully aware of the plight of Indigenous Australia, but there are so many types of dispossessed people out there, you know, who are immigrants, who are refugees. Like there's so much dispossession, and the
mm,
idea that there is an original place where everyone belongs is quite insulting to these people who are mixed between races, between situations. You know, there's so many of them out there. So I like the idea of the id. The minute we try to neatly categorize the world into good and evil, where
mm,
everyone has their proper place, the horse is always bald. You know.
mm. Also, just from a more practical perspective, I when someone gets a bit too into saying sorry for being on stolen land, I always think, well, you're going to give it back?
Yeah, right.
They go, no, of course not.
Yeah.
And like at that point, I think, well, this is like, of course, it's like it's a the acknowledgement is a meaningful action. It's just the intention is not to redress dispossession in any way. Like it really is directed at other people who are probably published with Melbourne University Press and doing quite well. Like they are able to drop $60,000 on a new set of solar panels and batteries.
Yes.
And yeah, they like their Wye River holiday home needs to be made more ecologically sustainable. Like to me, it feels more like that. It's in the same way that I will tell you can tell someone, oh, I got new solar panels. You can also say, yes, we're on stolen land.
Yeah. Totally right. And it's like, are you going to give it back?
That's almost always my first thought when someone says it too much. It's like, well, okay, give it back.
Go give it back. Come on. Let's
Yeah.
just say 20% of your net worth. Give it to someone.
Mm.
Then never say that sentence again. It's like, no,
Yeah.
we're not going to do that. Let's just have this eternal guilt, this eternal
Mm.
like Hail Mary of guilt.
Yeah. I mean, at least with the more conventional religiosity, it was very, very generative of a lot of very beautiful art. Whereas the new religiosity is quite actually artistically barren, I find.
Agree. I really
Say what
agree.
you like about Catholics. They have some absolutely stunning buildings and paintings and pieces of music.
And the repression generated this
Mm,
obsession with sex and desire and repressed or sublimated desire, right? It was always there. It actually it
hmm
was almost like that's kind of how I've been thinking, and I kind of mentioned this explicitly. What if they were just horny perverts all along, and the repression was just a way to like make the desire more titillating? Because if you're on a German
Yeah.
nudist colony and
Oh, what was
everyone's
this?
naked,
Was it
yeah,
the Jesuvians? Am I getting?
yeah,
Was that the group that was into that? Yeah. Yeah, I suppose in Christianity there's the acknowledgement of the presence of the. I mean, I guess you could just call it the id if we're going to stay in the psychoanalytic register. Like the presence of this screaming animal part of you, and they say it's sinful and it's something to be overcome, or it's Satan, but it's acknowledged to be there. Whereas in the new religiosity, parts of it feel like a denial of any almost legitimate presence of the id, of anything that's not educated into it.
could
To
it be
be
more
this.
Protestant? Could that view be a bit more Protestant? Because the Protestant view tends to like want to absolutely suppress the evil or the sinful in a way. It's got fewer rules, but those rules must absolutely be followed under pain of excommunication. The Catholics, with their like confessionals, always admitted that we have a lot of rules. It's going to be almost impossible to follow all of them, and that's why you've got the confessional. You've got you could go on the pilgrimage and take some years off your purgatory, right? There was always cheats. in a way.
Yeah, or even the existence of purgatory. It's, you've done bad things and you'll get punished for it, but you'll get rewarded eventually.
You
Like, we'll
go
purgate
eventually,
all of
yeah,
the.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd never even really thought of it beforehand. The acknowledgement of the id in various religious systems, which might be why my thoughts on it are a bit incoherent at the moment. But I think that there's probably something to it, and that might be one of the things that tends to drive all left progressives insane, is just the refusal to acknowledge the id.
I agree.
Mm. You asked me to read a few pieces for this. So, Exiting the Vampire Castle and Terminator versus Avatar by Fisher, and then Shamanic Nietzsche by Land. So, what was it about these pieces that made you pick them?
Specifically, Land, kind of, I knew him before his death. I came to him via the K-Punk blog, which got me, as a kid who had not gone through the formal university system, had gotten me really into philosophy. So his blog, just out there in the world, gave me this amazing introduction to continental philosophy and music and ways of seeing. I'm so glad that I managed to get in touch with Nick Land. I mean, not Nick Land, with Mark Fisher before he died, actually say thank him for everything that his blog meant to me. He was a real, like, mentor figure. And so his passing was so devastating in a way, but I'm glad I got to speak to him before that. And everyone now talks about capitalist realism as the main Mark Fisher view of the world. And I hate that book, to be honest. For me, that's like just Minima Moralia 2.0. It's just another, like, you set this impossible standard for how the world should be, and then capitalism is the thing why you can't have this ideal. There is no alternative. He is diagnosing problems, but so much more about Mark Fisher was really futurist. He was looking for this populist futurism in popular art. Terminator versus Avatar is that left accelerationist view of like, sure, we can all have this easy critique of capitalism, this kind of academic critique of capital, or we can look at that good part again of that period of Marx, who was actually looking to machines and how it would bring a new utopianism. So when he's talking about those two films, he's talking about how maybe capitalism isn't all that bad. Maybe we should be more open to modernity and to what's happening in the future. And the same with Land, the critique of transcendental miserabilism. He's also critiquing that academic progressive left's approach to just this trite critique of the world. If you look at any Guardian op-ed, it's just climate change and capitalism. That's always the cause for almost anything that's happening in the world, and it's always because the world is going to shit. So that's why I'm hoping Mark Fisher can be remembered for that time that he was real open to the future. Because remember, he suffered from clinical depression for a long time. And, that's ultimately he died of suicide. So there was a part of him and that was hopeful. And there was a part of him that was looking with hope and openness towards the future. And then there was obviously a part of him that felt utter despair. And I wish we wouldn't just take that book from him and use that book to just finger wag the present and anything about the present into these easy critiques of this is why you're all stupid, because you're all subsumed by capitalism, and capitalism takes everything that's good away from you. That was my main reason for those pieces on Mark Fisher.
Because I'd read Exiting the Vampire Castle previously, but I hadn't read Terminator versus Avatar. And the Terminator versus Avatar I found most interesting because it's quite explicitly talking about accelerationism, which I don't recall being present in capitalist realism, or if it was, it must have been minor enough that I just forgotten about it. So, but I expect a number of people listening will be aware, but for those who aren't, how would you define accelerationism?
Look, I think at this point it's a little bit of of a fad. It's splintered a lot,
Oh, absolutely. Like
and it's a past
on
fad. Like
Twitter, like every other
totally,
person, yeah,
totally, and
is
it's been rapidly misused. And I think from the left perspective, it was people saying, "What if we kind of saw where this headed?" And again, the left thing is always, how do we destroy capitalism more? So it was like, what if we used capitalism's own contradictions, we accelerated them to bring about that eschaton of that Marx predicted. That's the part I don't, and then there's the right wingers who are, or whoever's kind of the tech bros side, who are thinking about accelerationism as basically a libertarian fantasy of let us do whatever we want without regulation, and let us just get at it, and we'll produce our AI gods. So what I always took from instead accelerationism was more a positivity towards the future. And what we look at today is, if you look at the news cycle, everything seems to be going to shit. If you look at stats on poverty, on health, things have never been better in a way. And the more time we have to be online bitching and moaning and doom scrolling, the more we think things are worse. Whereas what I always took from that was a real look with a certain openness and gratitude towards how far we've come and how much more we can go, almost that Promethean view of the future, rather than this eschatological, apocalyptic view of the future. I took it in a very moderate sense. It's made me much more of a centrist to a degree. I'm not either on the leftist faction, and I think fully automated luxury gay communism is a completely ridiculous concept. No one would know what to do with themselves without some point of gainful employment. The physics would never work. The economy would never work. So that was some extremely online view of accelerationism. But also I'm not some kind of like Rocco's basilisk believing in this emergence of the techno god of AI. I also think that's pretty silly. I'm more someone who thought, well, imagine how much we've grown since World War II. Imagine how amazing the world has gotten. And it's only since the advent of social media that we all believe the world is going to fall apart a lot more. So yeah, that's what I've taken from that movement, without saying I'm much of an expert in it.
So it's not the Landian hyper racism that really attracted you to to becoming an accelerationist.
No.
Yeah, it is. It is funny that Fisher really is remembered for. I mean, I guess he did. Maybe this is where the accelerationism comes up in capitalist realism, because he does talk about how we've foreclosed upon the future, how we don't see the future anymore, and sort of this being used as an anesthetic trick. There is a future, there can be a future, but moping in an anesthetic society where we sort of dull ourselves with meaningless work, dull ourselves with alcohol or algorithmic entertainment, might be more comfortable than confronting the future's possibilities. Maybe that's sort of latently where the accelerationism is in that work.
Yeah, and I guess what I see also is, and this is a contrarian view, I think there was that height of the piety movement, 2015, peak cancellation period. Everyone was worried. And since then, that progressive left has lost so much power that now if you go on any kind of left publication, they're the ones who are mostly talking about the end of the world and the defeat of the world and the fact that the world has no future. And then they're worrying why are birth rates collapsing. So I almost think that catastrophic view of the world is being more and more upheld by the people who like to also say that they know better and they know a better way. And it almost comes down to the simple fact of it's easy to critique, and creation is really fucking hard.
Yeah. Yeah, diagnosis is oftentimes the easy part. Um, Coming up with concrete solutions is both, I think, more creatively difficult, but you're also just you put your credibility on the line much more. I think it's actually very, very safe to say to offer diagnoses and say things are terrible for these reasons. And oftentimes the reasons can be sufficiently vague that it's hard to totally disprove. Or you can claim something like you can include a sort of an escape hatch in your beliefs and say any critique of these beliefs is founded in, I don't know, false consciousness or repression and so on. I find there are often systems of belief that include ways to invalidate any sort of disagreement with them if someone's practicing them in a, I don't know, in a disingenuous way. The problem with making predictions is that you can fairly categorically say if they happened or not once you pass a certain point. Of course, some people will refuse to. So I immediately think of Paul Ehrlich, who wrote The Population Bomb and predicted, I think it was published in the 70s, and he predicted that it was either written in the 70s and predicted in the 90s or written in the 60s and predicted that in the 70s there'd be these just catastrophic global famines. And like it didn't happen. And the guy just doubled down on it. Is like, no, it's still coming. I was I was correct in my previous calculations, and I am still correct that these famines will occur in the future.
It's always
And
20
as a
years.
result,
20 years
yeah,
is always that point. It's far enough in the future that you'll forget.
That's when we're going to get nuclear fusion, and we're going to have catastrophic famines that'll wipe out 60% of the global population. Yeah, it's a particularly fascinating type of creature like Ehrlich who is categorically wrong, doubles down on his incorrect predictions, and doubles down on the radical prescriptions to reducing the human population that he says are necessary for his predictions that didn't come true.
It's true, and that's almost where I think of Fisher's Terminator vs. Avatar. It's the degrowth fantasy versus the growth perspective, and it's always degrowth, and it's degrowth. It's almost like a suicide pact, but you go first. We need to thin the world's population. Yes, someone needs to do it. Absolutely, yeah. You go first.
Yeah.
And this whole thing of even that cliche of infinite growth, you can't have infinite growth on a finite planet. I hear that so much. But the real meaning of growth is like plants grow. There are cycles of destruction of value and creation of value. No one is saying infinite growth to the stars. Recessions happen. Growth of value gets destroyed and it gets created. But the idea that growth is just an infinite thing that is either an infinite thing that will consume the planet and needs to be degrowth. I feel that's such a cliched view of the world as well, right? That it doesn't really correspond to anything. It's an easily chantable slogan.
Yeah, and it just doesn't feel like a very serious way to approach solving problems, because you can say, okay, degrowth. Countries compete with one another for resources, and I just don't really see in a competitive environment one country, unless they're, like a bunch of European nations are currently doing, just currently so comfortable that they don't meaningfully think things can get really bad, intentionally hamstringing themselves. That doesn't feel like a durable solution.
And that they are, and that's why I feel like I talk about the symbolic and the normative, and Europe more and more, the EU, I feel it's becoming this country where we should legislate reality in a way. It's a big reason why I wanted to leave Europe, and more Europe is like, well, if we legislate the right reality and we do sanctions on the countries that are mean to us or don't correspond to that reality, we can continue to enforce a sort of consensus of the real that is the right consensus, and I wonder how far it's going to go. Like, again, I'm not going to sit here and predict disaster either. You know, illusions can be extremely
Mm.
resilient too. But
Yeah, I forget which EU functionary it was who said that Europe can be a regulatory superpower. And I just thought, good fucking luck
what
with
does that
that.
mean?
Well, it's sort
I,
of the tacit acknowledgement that, yeah, we'll let the Americans and the Chinese invent stuff, and then we'll say, no, you're not allowed to do that. Or like you have to ask me for cookies every 30 seconds if you want it to be on people's computers.
so in my
I don't anticipate it's going to last forever, because apart from anything else, Europeans tend to be very, very proud, and like if the standard of living slips too much, like just ordinary people who aren't trying to legislate reality away will just get sufficiently upset at it that there will need to be some change. But at least for the moment, it's a weird kind of retirement village feeling as legislated from above, because it's not like Europe lacks for intelligent people who want to make a better life for themselves.
No, not at all. And that's why Australia keeps welcoming
Yeah,
the
yeah.
European youth, educated European youth by the hundreds of thousands every year, right?
Mm,
I'm one of them, and they'll continue to arrive. And it's funny, I was in a little like seminar on a certain area of cybersecurity where I'm in, and it's a really interesting area where they're talking about verifiable credentials or the digital driver's license. This is really cool. The main challenge is two things. I was put in this little group between a bunch of like government functionaries. So again, operating under systems of government patronage. And I immediately said, the problem is you have two problems, the brothel and the refugee. And they're like, what do you mean? Well,
mm,
if you give your digital driver's license at a brothel to prove you're 18, they can phone home to check it's authentic. And people don't want the government to know that you're going to
hmm.
brothels. Conversely, the challenge is also the underserved by technology, the refugee, the stateless person who will not have access to a smartphone with this fancy technology. You'll have to serve them as well. And these government people, their immediate response was the EU response, even though they're in Australia, was like, we'll legislate privacy by design, and we expect some wunderkind capitalist innovator to figure it out, which to me was such the easy way out. This is fun. It's like we'll legislate breakable encryption that's also strong.
Yeah.
Remember that whole like, how are you going to do that? How is that physically possible? And well, we'll just legislate the principles. And I'm like, and these are the people you think it's better who should be dictating reality if that this is what they're coming up with. It was
I
quite
think it
funny.
doesn't go far enough. I think they should just legislate the product into existence. Like,
Yeah,
why are there so many breaks in this chain? Why not just go straight to the source? Like, just legislate de novo the digital identity,
right. Yeah, just
and it's in
legislate away.
existence. Yeah. So, are you doing non-fiction work still? Because I came across things you'd written on triple ampersand. Are you still interested in that, or are you more interested in fiction now
I'm
and
currently
expressing these things through fiction?
I'm currently more interested in fiction, and I think what
Mm,
a lot of people say is no one wants to be overly didactic in fiction. I just want to write funny stuff, and of course, you always are the product of
mm,
your beliefs and your interests and the things you've read, and it comes out in the writing. Frankly, also, I'm at a period in my life where I don't have the brain power to just do pure philosophy anymore. I think
mm,
philosophy is super, super fecund for ideas. Like, I think you raid the pantry of philosophy to come up with ideas to write fiction. I think it's
mhm,
so good, and it's the conceptual creation of the world or of thought, and it's so
mhm.
good to go in, raid the pantry, and then run out into the messy world and see how you can throw some of those theories around. But I guess I'm less interested in the purely philosophical part. As much as I have lots of friends still working in it, and I have lots of good memories of it, I really I like the fiction element. Every now and again, I think in me will still be a lot more like theory fiction essays or
Mm.
theory slash political economy slash fiction essays. But yeah, less purely in the realm of the conceptual.
Yeah, I mean, from that perspective, then it makes sense why you like Ballard's writing, because I find he was remarkable in that maybe he wrote some like, just straight theoretical pieces that I'm not aware of, but he just wrote fiction that is fiction first and foremost. It doesn't seem to be fiction trying to necessarily make too much of a point. But just given his personal preoccupations, particularly with always a strangely affectless main character encountering a situation and by the end of the piece accepting the logic of the situation and becoming enfolded into it, or at least consciously part of the logic of the situation that always came up. He was really communicating ideas with his work. Now, you mentioned High Rise. In you talking about High Rise and The Gift, I was actually thinking of his collection Vermilion Sand, if you've read that, where he was saying with that he was trying to write science fiction not as a warning for the day or imagining wild futures, but trying to imagine plausibly what the future will be. And all the stories in Vermilion Sands have elements of, sort of fantastic technology in the future, but it's never so far ahead of us that it's unimaginable as, something that could never happen in the next 15 years. And also all of the technology is put to human uses. It's obviously serving human desires, like, I know, like shaping clouds in the sky because people like how it looks, and there being petty rivalries and sexual rivalries among the people making cloud sculptures. I mean, if you can find a question in here, feel free to go off. But
no, I love what you said. The petty rivalries and that's what I always find hilarious, and it's very Italian in me. Like, Italians always believe there is the sexual rivalry, and you'll do, you'll do so much for a petty rivalry. There isn't, again, this belief that one day we'll perfect the human nature and we won't be naughty anymore, and so that contraposition of Ballard to like godlike weird technology, along with our fundamental human pettiness. Again, I think if you look at that without judgment, with just saying in a very Nietzschean sense, you just affirm what is. That's where I see the very Ballardian move too. He's not trying to condemn it. He's just describing it. And then it's funny, I see people who read my stuff and think I'm being, maybe it's a satire, or maybe it's a critique. Maybe I'm trying to describe someone evil, and it's like, no, I'm literally just describing funny stuff that I find hilarious or interesting, and I'm not trying to put as much as possible a judgment on it. I guess I find it hard. I've tried to create characters that I hated, but I've never felt they come out good. Even when I'm writing about Hector or about the salesperson, there is a love to that character. It's not.
Yeah.
It's not.
Hector's not a bad guy.
Yeah, exactly. He just wants a good time, Like,
it's also just like I just have met so many Hectors in my life. I have a lot of time for that sort of guy.
Like, and my moral isn't, and this therefore the moral is, kids, don't be a Hector. Like, not at all. Not at all. And I've not written about the sort of characters we've been critiquing a lot here, the sort of inner North progressives, because until I can find a way to write a very nuanced, kind way about them, I'm not just going to write some petty, mean character that I don't like, Yeah.
Yeah, because being sympathetic to a Hector's pretty straightforward, because he's just having a good time. He's extremely vain, is aware that he's extremely vain. He likes the simple things in life. Just wants a gold chain and to have sex with a stranger.
Right, exactly. And even Ballard was quite, I was rereading Crash. He's quite a horny guy too in Crash.
Oh, extreme! Basically every book is full of mostly weird sex. At his most temperate, it's full of just kind of straightforward sex rather than having sex with cars.
Yeah, totally. And the thing I really resonate with Ballard is Ballard had this experience in a prison camp in World
Mm,
War II. And then he went to live most of his life and write
yeah.
in a suburb of London. And I feel that direct experience of a kind of wartime reality and then having to live amongst the well-heeled professionals, I've always felt that that's the part of Ballard that I kind of resonated with.
Mm,
There are weird things in my past that have happened that have not happened to most people. So living in this nice, leafy part of the world where I feel very privileged and very lucky to live, I find some of those luxury beliefs quite hilariously outrageous. And I think almost Ballard, he didn't need to move from that leafy London suburb to find such a treasure trove of characters who were almost alien to him, yet he understood them intimately.
mm. It is. I mean, it's always a temptation to look at an author's life or an artist's life and then try to draw links from that to their works. I've come across a number of people saying that you really shouldn't do it, but I think it's just very valuable. And in the case of Ballard, the events are like growing up in Shanghai and particularly in a Japanese prison camp, and then the sudden death of his wife. I think it was before the atrocity exhibition, I want to say. His wife died of pneumonia, and he was left with 3 kids that he had to raise. And there's such a turn in how he writes before and after that point. Because the things that to me are the most Ballardian are, like I said earlier, a character accepting the logic of a situation and living it, which has sort of always been present, even from very, very early on, like the drowned world.
Yes.
Like that's there from the beginning. But there's this almost a meanness or an inhuman aspect of it, this inhuman detachment that really, really started with the atrocity exhibition that I feel like was after a significant personal tragedy. That's the other building block of Ballard, that very eerie detachment. And maybe that's also where like the non-judgment that you're talking about comes from. Just the fact that it seems like he's almost not entirely there in these stories. So it's not only that he's not offering judgment, he's almost not offering anything.
So there's a massive, and I don't want to psychologize it, but there's this almost massive dissociative element to a lot of his writing.
Dissociation. That's a good way to put it. Yeah.
And he also said, like, Empire of the Sun, where he finally talks about, the Japanese prison camp, is something he wrote. Took him ages to sort of be able to write about that too. So I found that quite moving. He'd had this massive experience, and I like that a lot of his subject matter is about white collar professionals. I feel like we don't have a lot of literature about the white collar professional in a way. Like there's so much talk about certain segments of society, and everyone thinks about American Psycho when we're talking about like a certain upper echelon of that white collar. But he really talks about like his characters,
the boring ones.
Yes, doctors, lawyers, accountants, TV executives, mid-level TV executives, which cities tend to be chock full of. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's a real link between the fact that his characters tend to be fairly unremarkable and their surroundings, at least in his mid and later periods. So his earlier periods when he was writing a science fiction that he said was to explore inner space rather than outer space. You have things like the Crystal World, which is just a fantastic environment that it's in. But as his works mature, the places where they're set become more and more boring or more and more everyday and pedestrian. And he finds more and more meaning and just more and more fertile ground in these very everyday things, like in Concrete Island, just like
Yes.
a patch of grass between freeways. And I think there probably is some fairly deep psychological link between the fact that his characters tend to be very ordinary, the environments tend to be very ordinary, and the interplay between those two is fascinating. I mean, I'm not sure, I don't know a great deal about psychogeography and whether Ballard was aware of it, but he seems to at least have been very intuitively aware of it. His various characters accepting the logic of their steel and concrete surroundings and coming to resemble them.
I love that. Yeah, I'm not really aware of psychogeography as a field at all. I just love that. I think once I moved into a house and it was what you described as architectural torture, and it was harsh downlighting, and it was nothing you could have possibly realized on a rapid inspection. And as you know, the Australian property market is you get one inspection and then you sign your life off forever, like, and you have less consumer rights than if you buy a toaster. And a house is in the seven figures, and this place was architectural torture. So been reading Ballard, I immediately thought, yeah, well, I get that. I get that you can have some kind of building that will drive everyone insane.
Yeah. Actually, one thing that I mean, we mentioned it briefly when we were talking before recording, is multilingual writing, and you just mentioned offhand that you find writers who are multilingual or are maybe not writing in their first language to be to be really, really interesting. And do you find that this has influenced your own writing, either directly or in some occult way? The fact that you were like a primary Italian speaker for so much of your life.
Yes, look, I didn't think of it much until recently, but I always there's a number of ways that like English is a slut of a language. It's a glorious slut who slept with the world and gone contaminated by the world. And a lot of that is Latin. And so there's multiple ways Latin phrases are everywhere in English. And they're typically considered fancy words, right? Like, especially this whole Aussie thing, talk normal, don't use fancy language. But a lot of those words, as an Italian speaker, are just normal phrases in Italian that can immediately translate into English. I had more and more people who were saying, you have this amazing command of like fancy vocabulary. And I'm like, that's not fancy. That's just a Latinate phrase for something. And then I was reading Nabokov, and I'm always so gut punched by the prose style. And then reading about how we were discussing, he learned French, Russian, and English growing up, and then was writing in English, and that started to make a lot of sense. Is equally with Kundera. Kundera, was Czech, and then started writing in French. And so you get these interesting uses of language. And Kundera, in one of his nonfiction books, talks about the formative periods of a writer's life are so important. They're not equal. And the formative period is kind of like teenage to mid-20s. It's that maturity phase. And he talks so much about, like, as if you're an immigrant, there are certain parts of your life that, even though you've lived elsewhere, will always sort of determine certain obsessions you have, certain cultural architecture in your mind. So more and more, I just see that as interesting. There's a really cool guy who works with the neo decadents and the Justin Isis. He's got the neo passeist Substack, and he's like Australian living in Japan, is mostly speaking Japanese. Again, he's got great command of the English language in a very strange way, because it's kind of being filtered through Japanese, like, clarifying vodka through butter or something, to use the phrase. But yeah, without me consciously thinking that way, the way I do write, people find it interesting or peculiar, or I use certain words. So yeah, I'm I'm very fascinated in that.
Do you find the trajectory of your thought is different in English versus Italian versus whichever other languages you speak? Given that you spent you spent a lot of time in Switzerland, where just
Yeah,
being very multilingual is just what you do.
normal, just
Yeah.
normal. Look, I think in a way, yes, like I necessarily was not grown up Catholic, but as I was saying to you previously, like this enjoying of the Italian sex comedy genre, going from Decameron to like films of the post-war period, this finding human horniness really funny and slapstick. That's something which has stuck with me. Even certain weird Catholic views on repression or sexuality I just continue to be stuck with me more than any other country in the world. So yeah, I agree. It sticks with you. And then because I did high school in Italy, I still have a lot of the Italian sentence structure and those Latinate words still come to me naturally. When you go to a doctor and they use this term, it's
Mm.
not strange. It's the Latinate phrase for a body part or for a sickness. It makes perfect
Hmm.
sense. So yes.
And have you considered writing in Italian, or are you just so used to English that it'd be more effort than it's worth?
I I struggle, and it's not just me, it's many immigrant Italians I speak to. Over time, if you don't use the language a lot, and I try to use the language with my Italian friends, but it's a living thing. What I'd like to do is once, if I could afford it or something, is just go back to Italy and do again full immersion. Because I
Hmm.
find if I actually pick up an Italian book, they are using a lot of, how do you say it, $20 words that I'm always with a dictionary then looking up that specific word. And kind of back to the overall theme of the book is when you're kind of dragged kicking and screaming as a kid through all these cultures and you don't really have time to inhabit any one, I feel like I'm a jack of all trades, master of none.
Mm.
I don't necessarily own any of these cultures. I can't say that's my home. I can go back and I will be that. So I kind of always had to deal with this joke I tell myself: you're a complete fraud. You have no right to any culture you exist in. And it's gone from being something that was a painful thing that I had to discover as a teenager to more of like, hey, let's use this. There's all these other writers, and this is what's lovely about literature. There's all these other writers who have been through experiences of deracination,
Mm.
and uprooting and have done beautiful things. And then it transforms from like a point of pain to a point as you grow old and mature. It's like, hey, this is just something cool that you can throw into the mix of the creative cauldron, you know?
It's that because yeah, and also that deracination feeling is probably so contingent as well on when it happens. Because I grew up in Australia and moved to Europe as an adult, and so the experience of moving here just made me feel really like I'd never realized how Australian I felt until I came here and realized like no, I'm actually different to to locals here. So it happening during childhood and adolescence is it's probably its own specific thing and something you probably can't replicate.
Well, I imagine, you are in Prague, so you get told, oh, that's the Australian, right?
Mm.
And if you move around a lot, then if you're in Switzerland, you're the Italian kid. If you're in Italy, you're the German kid. And if you're in
Hmm.
Australia, it's like, oh yeah, that's the Italian kid. And it happens everywhere. And you're just like, okay, yeah, I guess just like I'm just that person.
Mm, mm, mm. Yeah, actually, I mean, you bringing up neo-Passéism actually um, reminded me. So I've definitely read and enjoyed their work on Substack. And for those not aware, neo-Passéism it's a Substack account. What is it in particular about them that draws you in?
um, they've embraced me. It's been a
Mm.
wonderful. They found my Substack, Justin, and said, now I'm considered. a neo-decadent author. And I think what I liked about them was, prior to Substack, you know how you feel things that are kind of iffy and strange, and a lot of it is determined by that orthodoxy that has been established over the past 10 years, that's coming apart now since the vibe shift. And they were the people that I found really articulated that well, specifically from a fiction perspective. They sort of, not just fiction, but they go through all of these cliches, these cultural cliches. And you're like, it's kind of like, for me, it was like finding an artistic home in a way, because you're like, yes, you're right. Why is everything so genreified? Why is there all these cliches about what constitutes good literature or what constitutes good art that is so trite and uninspiring and so, in a way, hearkening back to these big figures that are always the same. And so when I encountered them randomly, Facebook tells you should join the Neo-Decadents on Facebook. And then you started to really find interesting contemporary writers of any stripe, and so that's what I really, really have enjoyed about them. And again, I'm less interested in writing manifestos. Justin Isis have written a lot, really funny, really great. I'm less the manifesto writer and more like, let's go and do something weird. I feel like I would not want to write personally a manifesto. It would be too explicit. It would be I'd be giving away the secret of what I like to do. But I like when other people write manifestos. I love it as a genre of literature. So yeah, and they're the ones that have been, especially Justin's been really encouraging, because you often feel as just some person out in the world, if you're not sanctioned by a big press or, and instead, no, I really believe that just anyone can start writing on Substack and find their people, right? In a way. And those big names nowadays, the big publishing houses, the big universities, I don't feel at all intimidated by not being sanctioned by them. If anything, I feel quite proud in not being in any way identified with these trad old media establishments. And it was a lot the neo-decadence that started orienting my thinking towards that way.
Are there any other groups or people writing at the moment that you are finding really, really interesting or you're really enjoying?
Yes. So I really love Gary Shipley. Amazing. Again, he runs the gamut. So on one end, he's got hardcore philosophy books, lots of Baudrillard, and on the other end, he's got fiction. And then in the middle, he's got prose poetry and theory fiction. The one that really got me into sort of him is his book called Stab Frenzy, written 2024. Amazing book. You'll love it. If you've seen all the excesses and bullshit of the art world, you'll find it hilarious. And it's just pure theory fiction poetry. Another one is Audrey Satz. Love Audrey Satz.
Oh, yeah.
She's amazing. And she writes.
I read
so much.
Counter Illumination.
Yes, I
last year or this year.
On the floor here. But they're two that I really like. Yeah.
Counter Illumination was quite like, it wasn't a pleasant book to read.
Look, I'll be honest. I actually, my critique of her is maybe she needs a stronger editor, because she's written some chapbooks that are amazing. And Counter Illumination is this.
It's long. It's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot. I do think brevity is good sometimes. Like sometimes it's good. Yeah. But otherwise she's very original and very weird. And again, like she's like a Kiwi who lives in London, and I don't know how much of is in her work is true and how much is just completely fabricated. I don't want to know. I think it's great, whatever she's doing, because it's weird. It keeps me on my toes.
Yeah, I have been meaning to read more of her work after Counter Illumination had me kind of exhausted by the end of it.
It is exhausting, and that's why I prefer her shorter works. And also, I got it. Justin put me in contact with Lewis Wolston, the sort of
Oh yeah, yeah,
tourist
yeah.
writer, and he sent me his book. I've been really enjoying that. Like, I want to write a review of his, and he's, in my view, like a contemporary kind of Bukowski. Like
Yeah.
writing about the down and out world of the streets in a way that only Bukowski at the time wrote about. And then, I don't know, we thought that white trash was too trash to even be considered ever again. And he writes about that, and I found that quite moving. And also his sort of stories of growing up in strict religious / culty environments, I could very much understand that. So yeah, I've been really enjoying his collection of short stories, The Everlasting. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. All of Wilson's books are really great. I really recommend all of them. So, where can people find your work? What work of yours do you want people to be aware of?
So look, again, I'm not hoarding about information. A lot of my stories are on Substack, and the book. Otherwise, if you want to support me and my continued writing, you can buy the book. It's on Amazon, or there's the only indie bookstore that stocks me as World Food Books in Melbourne, where there's like a limited edition book where I have much heavier paper, and I have a bunch of fake blurbs from a bunch of authors who some I like, some I don't like, but like a lot of neo-passéist popular authors who I've made up blurbs to say this is great, and I'll probably get sued if that book does come into publication. There's only like 100 copies I got printed, but that's World Food Books in the Nichols building in Melbourne.
Beautiful. Well, thanks so much for coming on. And if you publish anything else, just reach out and talk about that one too. And
Awesome.
to everyone listening, thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, Jack. Thanks for having me.